The AS400 is actually a marvelous box. I look at it and the SQL Server world, and if I was an executive that had to pick AS400 versus SQL Server, if I discounted the resource thing, where there's not very many AS400 programmers anymore, from a pure technology, I think the AS400 beats SQL Server hands down. You could do all this stuff. In fact, the AS400, it's not technically MPP,
Hmm.
massively parallel processing. It has early intellectual property that a forerunner to MPP,
Well,
because it was the first platform to not store objects in contiguous space. Before that, everything was always had to be contiguous. And then when they add
interesting.
multiple processors, that kind of simulates an MPP. I would say most of the AS400 difference is not the AS400, it's the programming culture
Mm,
that has not adapted to more modern conventions.
mm.
They've taken, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so they've left everything as a giant monolith, left a lot of things with the 10 character naming conventions, RPG language. AS400 will run Python, it will run
Well,
PHP, it will run C, C++.
so you could conceivably have, you know, data visualizations or reports built in another language on the AS400, but
Yeah, it's a culture thing more than
yeah.
anything. And the whole point of a data warehouse is that you take all the anomalies, idiosyncrasies of a transactional system and move it in a data warehouse for performance, for analytics, so you can run intense queries without affecting day-to-day operations.
If you have a new customer come through the door, so let's say, someone comes to the door and they've got all their data on an AS400 system, what are some of the things that you need to ask a new customer to get started finding all of their data and getting the right data loaded into the data warehouse?
It's no different than any other database. And Matillion has a out-of-the-box connector to AS400 iSeries, integrated with other systems. So it's just another source system. There's nothing special or complex about the table structure in an AS400 as opposed to SQL Server or anything else. In fact, there are advantages to how the table structure was implemented in the AS400, because any flat file or table can be queried through SQL. You don't have that distinction between a file, uh, like a text file, and uh, a database table. It's all just kind of one thing. So the AS400 was the first platform to be truly object based. It is an object oriented uh, architecture operating system, and they have objects, and then a table is just a subtype of an object. And they put ODBC connectors on it so that you can, and JDBC connectors, so that somebody like Matillion can just out of the box go grab and pull the data, just like they would from SQL Server or Oracle or any other database, MySQL. Some of the oddities, though, there are anomalies because of the heritage of the AS400,
Yeah.
and that is if they're still running really old style, you have a limit of like 6 character or 8 character field names, column names, and you have to understand that. So if you had the PO PO header, you might call it P1 PO num.
Pretty
If you
coded titles.
Yeah. Now, they did actually have SQL call names that you could append, but it was more like a comment field
Mm.
in than anything. So you can still have, on hand quantity as a field name that SQL will recognize if they've configured it that way.
So getting in there and spelunking your way into understanding the data and the logic applied to it. If you're trying to get data out into your data warehouse, requires some
Yep.
background knowledge. Yeah.
Yep. And AS400 is IPSIDIC based, not ASCII.
Hmm.
Although, they've layered support for ASCII and Unicode, but natively, most people still use IPSIDIC, which doesn't sound like a big distinction, but it really is because one is you don't have an integer. One thing story I like to tell is I actually use an integer for numeric, whole number numeric,
Hmm.
and he just got really upset because I was using all these strange data types that just was very upset by it, and I had to tell him this is the most common data type in the world,
Hmm.
and he didn't get that. He didn't understand it.
What is it that you know about the AS400 that others don't who haven't been trained in it?
So it started from a card-based system,
Well,
and they always made it backward compatible. So depending on how advanced the people were that developed the systems, can have an extremely antique uh, coding mentality.
yeah.
Uh, One thing that is very common with AS400 is you have uh, instead of a three-tiered architecture or design patterns, um, database access, uh, presentation logic, and business logic are the three tiers.
Hmm.
Uh, in the AS400, it was all built in a monolith so that the presentation logic, the database access, and the business rules were all in one program
Well,
instead of, and so you rarely use, uh, even in the RPG, they have native constructs to access the database, chain, read. And the other main difference is, so when you run a SQL query, uh, most databases will figure out the appropriate access path to pull the data uh, most efficiently.
mm,
But when you use a native processes like chain and read, you have to actually control that by creating your own indexes
mm,
and using that index when you do the chain and read.
mm,
So it's just different. And then the
yeah.
RPG language is different. So
Mm,
RPG languages started as report program generator. It was a way to quickly build reports
mm,
and produce report output. And it has evolved that so that if you're looking at current RPG, it looks more like C than any other language.
mm,
But you can have any shade from a report program generator to C
mm.
style coding. Uh, and most people kind of stopped at the monolith pattern.
What about like availability of people who know AS400? That's kind of a unique skill that we bring even at Retlia, as we have an in-house specialist for AS400. I certainly hear people that have challenges with getting support for AS400.
Oh, absolutely. That's 100% true. The number of people that understand AS400 and newer technology, you can count on your fingers and toes.
Unlock your AS400 data today with a retail data warehouse and BI from Retlia.